Hey there! Is today your first time here? Or maybe your first time in a while? If so, maybe you're wondering exactly who we are and what this church is all about. Well, we'd like you to know that we're a group of ordinary people who are on an amazing journey together, following Christ. Our guide is the Bible because it's the divinely inspired Word of God, and it will never take us in the wrong direction. Along the way, we hope you'll see that we are welcoming and spiritually passionate, and that getting to know you is a big deal to us. We know that the road is rough sometimes, but we'll work really hard to bring you practical and relevant messages to equip and encourage you through life's ups and downs. We want you to know that we care about this community, and we believe that it's our job to make it a better place. So, no matter who you are or where you've been, we're glad you're here with us today. And we hope that you'll join us on our journey, following Christ and living out His plan for us. So, welcome to church.
Good morning and welcome to Sunday School again from home. And I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day, in the beginning of the day, to join with us as we get into the Word of God. And today we're still talking about justice, but today is justice and the marginalized. I think many of us that's in this class this morning have been in a marginalized place, a place to where you were looked at as insignificant, as not really someone that was making a contribution or could even make a contribution. And so we didn't have the ability to or the means to for justice. We didn't have the information to get justice that was offered at no cost. And it was a real bad place in many of our lives because we felt we had no help. But today we're going to talk about how that class, and it still exists all over the world today, can get justice, or they got justice back in the Bible days, and how we can apply the principles today to bring about that kind of justice in our time. My name is Ricky Pitts. For those that are listening in today for the first time or just visiting, thank you. And I'll be teaching the class today, and on behalf of True Deliverance Holiness Church, where Bishop Nolan T. Torbert is the pastor, the founder, and the overseer. The lesson is coming from Deuteronomy chapter 24, verses 10 through 21. And so let's kind of open up our lesson today with really three questions that I want you to think about as we go through our lesson today. One is, do you give the same respect to people poorer than you that you give to those that's wealthier than you? Do you give them the same respect? Number two, what have you done for those less fortunate than you lately? What have you done for the less fortunate lately? And number three, do you charge them for the things you do for them? Let's say you got to take them to the store to get groceries or to pay a bill. Do you say, okay, that's going to be $15? Let's say they need a pair of shoes that you obviously ain't using, or some clothing that you're not wearing or cannot wear. The other day, my daughter was in town, and I said, I think I had on a suit or jacket, and I said, this jacket has got too little for me. My daughter said, Janae said, is it got too little for you, or you done got too big for it? You know, so, but the latter was true. Okay, I had gotten too big for it. And there are things that we have that we can give away that we will not even miss it. But there's a tendency in the nature of humans to hold on and to things that we can no longer use. So we have a lot that we can learn from this lesson today. We've gone through all the books of the Old Testament, and so many of those, include myself, have remembered all 39 books of the Old Testament. We're going now into the New Testament, and we've already remembered the 4 books of the Gospel, to include the one book of history and the 14 Pauline epistles. And today we're going to go over the 7 general epistles, and and to include Revelation, and we'll have remembered, which is one book of prophecy. So 7 general epistles and one book of prophecy, and we would have remembered the 39 in the Old and 27 in the New, to be able to quote all of them. That's a lot of folks can do it, but quite a few cannot. And so Sunday school class, those that have done this, you've done it. It's a pretty big deal what you've done, and because you're in a small group that can say that they remember them. Now the key now is to keep them in memory, and to keep that little list that you have as a constant reminder of the books of the law and the books of history, the books of poetry, and all the books of the major prophets and the minor prophets, and all of them, the Pauline epistles, the general epistles, the book of history, in both cases, and the book of prophecy. So when it's all said and done, if you have to reference the titles in terms of law and history and poetry and so on and so forth, you'll be able to remember them here on out. My wife learned hers as a little bitty girl, and now how to sing them, and she knows them. But let's jump right in, because I'm already about 5 minutes into our lesson. The lesson is, the first part is just lending. Justice, I could say justice in lending. Deuteronomy 24, verse 10 through 13, broken down in 2 sections. Section 1 is respecting the person. That's in verse 10 and 11. And then part B is respecting the pledge. That's verses 12 and 13. So let's read the verses in our lesson, 10 and 11. When thou doest lend thy brother anything, thou shalt not go into his house to fetch his pledge. Thou shalt stand abroad, and the man to whom thou doest lend shall bring out the pledge abroad to thee. Now, a little commentary on verses 10 and 11. Lenders were allowed to take collateral, or they could take a pledge as security for a loan. But they could not take the person's source of livelihood, whether it be a donkey, whether it be a millstone. They couldn't take that as a pledge. They couldn't take a widow's clothing that they probably used to wear during the day and to keep them warm at night. I want you to read about that in Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 6 and 17. In addition to that, to maintain the dignity of the one that's borrowing the borrower, the lender was not permitted just to bust up into the person's house and say, give me my pledge. They couldn't do it. Instead, they had to stay outside. The word says abroad, allowing the borrower to bring the pledge outside to the lender, so they can maintain some sense of dignity. And Old Testament history also, as time passed and it was unfolded, people saw the dangers of doing this kind of thing, or sometimes using collateral, or even co-signing or putting up any kind of security. They saw the dangers of that. Now, even today, you got to be real careful when you co-sign for someone, particularly when they have no intentions of upholding their side of, let me say, the bargain. And in time, the people of God saw the dangers of either scenario, collateral or securing a loan, co-signing. So I want you to read Proverbs 17 and 18 for more information on that, and 20 and 16, same in Proverbs, and 22 and 26, all these in the book of Proverbs. Now, verse 12 and 13, and if the man be poor, thou shalt not sleep with his pledge. Don't keep it all night long, okay? In any case, thou shalt deliver him the pledge again when the sun goeth down, that he may sleep in his own raiment, and bless thee. And it shall be righteousness unto thee before the Lord thy God. Now, a little commentary on verses 12 and 13. The law was pretty clear about lending to the poor. The lenders were not allowed to charge at that time. The Hebrews were not allowed to charge interest to other Hebrews. You read about that in Leviticus chapter 25, verse 35 through 37. In addition to that, if clothing, what the word is called raiment, was all a poor person had to put up as a pledge, the lender was against the law. They was prohibited from keeping that thing all night long. And so this kind of justice and doing the right thing resulted in two outcomes. Number one, the borrower, the one that borrowed from the lender, likely offered a prayer of thanksgiving for the kindness of the lender. So, Lord, I really thank you because here's a man that loaned me what I needed in my time of need, and he treated me with justice. Lord, I'm asking you to bless him and keep him and bless this all that he has to do. And the Lord heard the prayer of the poor person. Number two, the lender's kindness would be seen or deemed as righteousness, considered in right standing with God. You read about that in Genesis 15 and 6, where Abraham's belief, he believed in God, and that faith was counted as righteousness to him. Again, Genesis 15 and 6. It's important also to know that God's very nature is righteousness and justice. And since God's nature is righteousness and justice, he wanted his people to walk in that same righteousness. I want you to read about that in Jeremiah chapter 9, verse 24, and 1 John chapter 3 and verse number 7. Now we're going to transition now to just labor, justice and hiring practices. Number one is broken down in two sections. Just oppression was forbidden. That's verse 14. Then opportune wages is verse 15. Let's look at verse 14 first. Thou shalt not oppress an hired servant that is poor and needy, whether he be of thy brethren or thy strangers that are in the land within thy gates. Israelites were, they had been in slavery for a long time down in the land of Egypt. And so now they were not permitted to be sold as slaves. However, if an Israelite who had fell on some hard times, they could kind of work it off by serving other Israelites as hired servants or as a sojourner, a temporary stay. They didn't come there to be there for a long period of time, and they were just going to be there for a period of time. They needed a layover. They needed some means to help them for a temporary period of time. But they also could do it with the expectation of knowing that at some point I'm going to be free again. I'm not going to be an indentured servant for an extended period of time. I'm going to work off my debt, and when I work off my debt, I expect to be free. I expect to go on and move on and do other things that need to be done in my life. That was the mindset back at that time. I want you to read Leviticus 25 and 35 and also verse 40 and 42 in that same chapter. Read Exodus 21 and 2 and Deuteronomy 15 and 12 for more information on this indentured servanthood or servitude at that time. And there was laws that were put in place to protect the hired servants, those that were employed to get a job done. And they were put in place to maintain the economic livelihood and the ability of the poor brethren and the poor strangers, the sojourners. And without law and justice, those workers could become, if they didn't have the law on their side and someone to execute justice, they could become in a more marginalized situation than they were already in. They could be seen as even more insignificant, unable to give anything to society, unable to put back into society, just saw somebody that was in the way. If they didn't have some kind of law and justice to stand up for them or in place for them, they could be in a real bad place for all of their lives. Now let's look at verse 15 about opportune wages. Verse 15 says, at his day, talking about the poor person, at his day thou shalt give him his hire, H-I-R-E. Neither shall the sun go down upon it, for he is poor, and setteth his heart upon it being his pay, lest he cry against thee unto the Lord, and it be sin unto thee. They just couldn't do a person any kind of way back that in. Okay? And we can't do it a person any kind of way now and think we're going to get away, because God sees everything. He's watching everything. And everybody's going to reap what they sow. Don't let nobody fool you now. Everybody's going to reap exactly what they sow. You know, poor workers at that time was probably living, and we read about this in our commentary, from hand to mouth. Whatever put into the hand, they had to eat it up. I mean, that, right then, so to speak. When my mama used to say, we came up as kids, my mama she took care of 4 boys after my parents were divorced. And she got her little pay, you know, she worked little part-time jobs, cleaning houses. And I recall she worked in a box factory, and sometimes came home with little paper cuts on her hand and this type of thing. And she said, when she got her check, she says, folkses, it's already gone. She says, already gone. Living from hand to mouth, trying to maintain a life of four boys. And we were fully boys. And, you know, somehow she did it, you know, hand to mouth. And they were paid at the end of every day. And listen to this, they depended on getting that pay at the end of the day to take care of their immediate daily needs. They didn't have no surplus. They didn't have no discretionary income. When anything left over to go out and let's go on the town. No. I want you to read about this in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 13. Kind of compare or read some reference there. And then so not giving a poor person, failing to return a poor person's pledge at the end of that day would be considered unrighteous. Because here's a person right here that's in a position of power. They had means to give to a person or to lend to a person and to take a pledge or collateral. If they didn't give that pledge back at the end of that day, they were considered unrighteous and withholding their pay. I ain't gonna pay y'all today. I ain't have time to go by and get it. If they did that, that was a sin. Well, the law just did not play. And so there are some pretty powerful principles here that we can learn in this time we're living in now. And if workers were treated unjustly, they had the power to call on the Lord and tell the Lord about it, and the Lord would hear them and bring about justice. And God was going to handle that. He was going to handle the situation of the one that did wrong and didn't show no justice. They had the Lord to face, because the poor person had the Lord on their side. Now, it's amazing about this. Now, the poor person had the Lord. They knew they had the Lord on their side. They could call on the Lord for justice. But somehow they didn't see how they could call on the Lord to also show them the way to come out of that situation. Well, that's the way it was. The same thing as today. And we see certain folks that they would say they ought to just come up out of there. They ought to just pull themselves up by their own bootstrap. I heard Dr. King say it's not right for you to tell a bootless man that he should pull himself up by his own bootstraps. Well, listen, he don't have any boots. He's a bootless man. So we have a lot to learn, and we don't have a long time to learn it. I want you to read Exodus 22, verse 22 and 23 for more information on that. Now we're going to get into a just community. And it's broken down in 3 different sections. Number 1 is commanding punishment. That's verse 16. Number 2 is caring for the needy. That's verse 17. And part 3 is corporate memory. That's verse 18. Verse 17 says, the father shall not be put to death for the children, neither shall the children be put to death for the fathers. Every man shall be put to death for his own sins, is what the word says. Hebrew law had certain parameters in place to allow for the proper and just treatment of an innocent family member, innocent, that was affected because of something crazy that their kinfolk did. Okay, so the law had things in place to protect them. And what this law did, it prevented what could be a chain of revenge. You did this, so I'm going to do this. You did this to me, so I'm going to get you. So the law put things in place to prevent this cycle from taking place. And you see that now today. You see some folks in our families that have been offended by somebody else. And since they offended your child, you don't like none of their kids, your brother's kids, because one of his kids offended your child. So you don't like none of his kids. You don't like his wife. You don't like her kinfolks, her mama and her daddy. You don't like. That's just. You see how crazy that sounds, okay? But that happens. That happens. It happens in family. It happens among the races. You know, it's wrong for me to say I don't like no white folks because white folks had my people in slavery. Hold it. You don't like no white folks? Everybody that's white done did you wrong. The whole nation of white folks. I don't like no black folk because that black man, he stole from me. That black man right there, he did this. That black man right there didn't pay me back. That black man borrowed some money from me and he disappeared. You don't like no black folk because that one person did you wrong. You see y'all see how stupid that sounds? So we have a lot to learn because we're teaching these things when we show these kind of actions to our children. When you hold grudges against kinfolks or against races because a period in time where injustice was rampant, we put the whole nation in the same boat. I'm gonna leave it alone because some people disagree with me on this. I understand, but the truth is the truth. Each person would suffer the consequences of their own sin. But I want you to keep this in mind. The repercussions of those sins, repercussions were experienced by others. If I have that kind of attitude, it's going to spill over to the kids or the grandkids. Now, here's an example of a repercussion. A supporting parent end up committing a crime and going to prison. And that's going to cause a debilitating effect on those that he took care of or she took care of when they were working, because now that income, they've been fired from the job, and there's no benefits. All the health insurance is gone, and now the family is there to suffer. So the family was affected by the crime that was committed by the supporting parent, the father or the mother, and it was debilitating. So the soul that sinned, it shall die. There are consequences, class. Letter B, caring for the needy. Verse 17, thou shalt not pervert the judgment of the stranger, nor the fatherless, nor take a widow's raiment as a pledge. The law provided a whole lot of reminders how God's people were to uphold justice for a certain group. The strangers, the fatherless, and the widow. You read about this in Exodus 23 and 6 and 9, Leviticus 19, 33 and 34, and Proverbs 22 and 22. And then concern for this same group, the fatherless, the widows, the stranger, were extended from the Old Testament into the New Testament. You read about that in Matthew chapter 25, verse 35 through 36, Acts chapter 6, verse 1 through 5, 1 Timothy 5 and 3, and verse 16, Hebrews 13 and 2, and James 1 and 27. So following God's command for just living righteously, required that we notice the people that were vulnerable, the folks that was vulnerable to be taken advantage of because they either didn't know or didn't have legal counsel, nobody to talk to, didn't know their rights. can be easily taken advantage of. And God's people had to give extra attention to those people at that time. The third part of our lesson here is corporate memory, verse 18. But thou shalt remember that thou wast a bondman in Egypt, and the Lord thy God redeemed thee thence. Therefore I command thee to do this thing. That's what the word says, do this thing. Now, I'm going to read a little bit about verse 18, a little commentary here. You have it in your commentary. I'm not going to cover all of it because I'm about to run out of time here. Moses reminded this second generation. Sometimes kids forget about where they come from sometimes, anyway, he reminded them of their history as slaves down in Egypt land. And that little history lesson should serve to them as a foundation of who they are, who they were, and where they had come from, and how God delivered them. And this lesson was for a corporate memory of their ancestors and their ancestors' suffering as slaves in Egypt. How their ancestors was also delivered with the mighty hand of God. They were redeemed. And that history lesson of slavery and redemption was enough to motivate them to show compassion to the marginalized, the seemingly insignificant, or really the insignificant. And they had all of the signs to show that they were considered a nothing and a nobody. So they should remember in other words, Israel should remember where they came from. And so then the Israelites were to keep that in mind. And since God gave them justice, when injustice really ruled the day, and they should remember what God did, and then also treat others as the Lord had also treated them. You read about it. You read in Matthew 18, 23 to 35 about that unjust servant. He owed some money to this man. He went crying and snotting and all this going on. I ain't got it. Give me some time. I ain't got it. Well, then he had a guy that owed him some money. Grabbed the guy and give me my money. He forgot about what the man had just did for him. Sometimes we do that. We forget where we come from. We forget how the Lord has done so much for us, and we cannot tell it all. Then we get into section 4, a just harvest. In verse 19, regarding the grain, and then also verse 20 and 21 rather, regarding the produce. Let me read verse 19. We're about to run out of time. I hope we get it done. When thou cuttest down thine harvest in thy field, and thou forgot a shaft in the field, thou shalt not go again to fetch it. It shall be for the stranger, for the fatherless, and for the widow, that the Lord thy God may bless thee in all the work of thine hands. The law made it clear that the corners of that field, should be left unharvested. And they can only harvest the field one time, so that the poor and the stranger could come in there and get the leftovers. Read Leviticus 19 and 9 through 10 and 23 and 22. And this legislation, or this law, really, we see the same thing in the life of Ruth. Y'all remember about Ruth? Ruth had this rich kinfolks. She ended up over there working in his field, and she found, Boaz. Some women, they're trying to find out. I'm trying to find my Boaz. I'm trying to find but they ain't doing nothing. You ain't, anyway. So let me come out of there. The phrase, the Lord thy God may bless thee, meant that God's blessings were contingent on meeting the needs of other people, helping them. Read about that in Proverbs 19 and 17. Then the last part of our lesson today, and we got to bring it on home now. When thou beatest thine olive tree, thou shalt not go over the broth again. It shall be for the stranger, for the fatherless, and for the widows. When thou gatherest the grapes of thy vineyard, thou shalt not glean it afterward. It shall be for the stranger, for the fatherless, and for the widows. At that time, they had crops that grew together, like kind of side by side, and each crop really helped the other crop in terms of health and well-being. But when they got that stick and beat that olive tree to make them make those ripe olives fall to the ground, they can go back and beat it again. That they had to leave the olives on the tree for the poor, the widows, and the strangers. The same rule applied for when they was gathering grapes. I got to bring this thing to a close now, and I want to read a little part of our commentary in conclusion. Applying God's principles for the ancient culture, where 98% of the people at that time lived on farms, where now it's only 2%, it's not going to be an easy thing to do. But a common ground starting point is that God's people, the people of God of all times, should live in such a way to respect the dignity of those that are in need. And this lesson then provides the principles of justice that a Christian should model and a Christian should help to bring to help legislate or bring into action or enact. The law has made it real clear, and the Lord has made it real clear, that his heart and his compassion is with those that are in need. What about us? Where's our heart? Where's our compassion? Do we think about helping other people and don't tell the whole world what you did? I got a new friend of mine that I've met, and we have a Bible group that I attend on Wednesday mornings. And one of the lawyers in the group every year puts on a Santa Claus suit and goes around, somebody drives them around in a truck to poor communities, to poor people, and he helps them and brings Christmas and joy to them with a suit on that he's had for many, many years. And they was kind of joking, saying that he had not washed the suit for a long time, but I can assure you, those kids didn't care nothing about how the suit smelled or none of that. They just saw Santa Claus coming in, bringing a bicycle, bringing joy, bringing a present in poor communities. When I heard that, it was because I remember where I came from. I remember when we used to get things brought to us and helped us, and how much joy it brought us. What have we done to help somebody? What are you going to do this week to help somebody? What have you done last week? What have you done this year to go out of your way to help somebody? What have we done? Hey, class, we out of time now. Y'all have a great rest of the Sunday, and we'll hope to see you next Sunday. Same time, same place. Take care.